everyone, Ripley Sellers with Bob's Watches. I'm here in the studio with Justin for another episode of Vintage of the Week, where we pull aside one remarkable timepiece and share with you exactly why we love it. Well, Justin got an exciting watch here, but as always, quick wrist check. What are you wearing today?
Well, Vintage of the Week, I'm going vintage. Vintage Speedmaster, first watch worn on the moon.
Beautiful.
Love the Speedmaster, love vintage. It's a great watch.
I'm also wearing a Speedmaster, not quite vintage. This one's about 20-ish years old, so we're approaching there. But
almost, yeah.
Yeah, but we're very much similar on the same page.
Another great choice.
We are not talking about a Speedmaster. We just coordinated today. What we are talking about is a vintage Tudor sub, reference 94110. This particular example is produced from about 1980, and it could best be described as like the blue snowflake equivalent of like a 1680 Rolex Submariner.
Exactly.
But it's kind of transitional in that sense of you get a Quickset Date, despite the fact that you get that acrylic top hat crystal and a watch that overall physically feels very similar to like a 1680.
Right. So much so as in, I mean, we're talking about Rolex case, Rolex clasp, Rolex
Exactly. This is when Tudor and Rolex were using a lot of the same parts. So you're going to see the Rolex coronet on the crown, the case back, the clasp. I mean, the bracelet itself is the same 93150 that you'd find on like a 90s Submariner. But obviously when you get to the dial and bezel, it's not.
It's very similar. It's also very different. I mean, you know, talking about the dial and bezel, it's immediately apparent that we're not talking about a Submariner. I mean,
for starters, it's blue.
It's blue, right? Which is great. I love that. I love the black, super classic. But you know, there's something special about blue. I like a blue dial, and you know, this is a great example.
Yeah, and they are more rare than their black dial counterparts.
Yes.
Because so many of the parts were interchangeable, sometimes you'll see a Tudor sub, a black version that lost its bezel and was replaced with one from a 1680. There wasn't a blue sub in steel for a 1680, so if you needed a new blue bezel ring for it with white markings, that's not going to be something you're going to find in any other watch. So to get one like this, and obviously this is its original insert in great condition. Look how ghosted it is.
Yeah.
But I really like these Tudor subs because as much as they have in common with their Rolex counterparts, look at the dial and hands, the hour markers themselves, it's so distinctly Tudor.
It is, right? Right off the bat, you know, it's got those Tudor snowflake hands that you can, I mean, anyway, for me, I associate that. You see them, it's like, you know, it's very Tudor to me. Which, truth be told, when I first was kind of introduced to them, they weren't my favorite hands, but over time, they've really grown on me, and I love the look. I mean, they're so utilitarian. There's just so much there when we talk about lume. You know, they're bright and big, and also they're very distinct. It's, like I said, it's very Tudor. You notice right off the bat. And we talk about the hour markers, right? They're square and they're big, and it's immediately apparent that it's not a Rolex. It's not the circle hour markers, you know, that are just the lume plots or have the gold surrounds. I mean, it's big, chunky, square. I think that kind of ties in with the styling of the snowflake hands as well. So I love those details about this watch. I think it makes it really unique and really beautiful.
Entirely agreed. For Tudor subs, because there are some with Mercedes hands that look almost like a dead ringer for like a 5513, except with a little bit different dial text. I love the snowflake hands and the square markers. I think it's just distinctly different, and obviously it kind of serves as the backbone of Tudor's current production watches. But one of the things I think is fantastic about these is look at the case back on it. You know, this obviously isn't anything that you're seeing anymore where it, you know, talks about its Rolex's design, its Rolex's Oyster case, and that kind of served as the backbone for Tudor. The concept of Tudor when Hans Wilsdorf founded it was to use Rolex's Oyster case and feature it with, you know, generic off-the-shelf movements to achieve a lower price point, but still have the same durability. But I think in this instance, this versus a 1680, I'd almost rather have the generic movement in this one, because it is made a little later, around 1980. You get a Quickset Date, and I think that for
it's a nice feature.
Yeah, super convenient for date displaying vintage watches. One of the things you frequently hear the most is, "Oh, I'm gonna have to wait until the month comes around, or spend a few minutes going back and forth." And on this one, you get a Quickset, like right here. I mean, it looks just like a distinctly vintage sub, and you know, it is. But you know, you set the time as you would on any regular watch, but then the date.
Yeah, really nice feature.
You get the same convenience as you would from a contemporary timepiece, but at a glance, not only does this not look like anything that Tudor currently makes, but it also distinctly doesn't look like a Rolex despite using Rolex manufactured case components and even has the Rolex logo on it.
Right. That's one of my favorite things about this watch is, you know, it's a great amalgamation of Rolex and Tudor, and it illustrates how the companies operated at that time. Like you said, the point was to use these resources that Rolex had to make it at a more attainable price point, but still keep the durability and all that. So that's something that doesn't happen anymore. We're not going to see that again. Can you imagine a watch company nowadays that uses their parts under a different brand and their parts are still labeled and it's just kind of like a combination of these two companies? It's like, it's just so unique, and I don't feel like it's happening again. And that's like a little snapshot in history of, you know, when Rolex and Tudor were so close that they were literally sharing the same parts and names on things. And it's just really special. I think it's a really special point about this watch.
100% agreed there. And this example is also in great condition.
Right.
I believe this one's coming from the family of the original owner, and which, you know, looks great, and that's always good to hear as well. But then you start looking at the overall condition of it. Look how sharp this bezel ring is. You know, it's a piece that's frequently turned and held and rotated, and, you know, on the edge of the watch and frequently comes into contact with things. That's often the first part to get destroyed, over polished, worn, and this one's really sharp. The watch has been polished before, but I mean, the fade to scratch ratio on the bezel is great.
It's really nice.
And then the lugs, it's still nice and thick. You know, bezel ring sharp. It's a good, honest watch. And I mean, if you're looking for a blue Snowflakes and you want a date,
this one's nice.
Yeah, this would probably be my go-to model for
and
it.
I mean, it bears mentioning because this watch is actually for sale on our site. As of filming, you know, all the Vintage of the Week watches are for sale, so someone can go to bobswatches.com and add them to their collection if they like. So the specific details about this watch become more important than just, you know, any watch in this reference.
Yeah, and I love to see Tudor and blue in general. You know, I mean, obviously black was the de facto color, but Rolex doesn't make a blue steel sub.
Right.
And so when you see a watch like this, before you even start looking at the hands, the hour markers, the name on the dial, it just hits different because it's blue. And then the colors you get when they start to fade, or how it, you know, a blue dial works well with the warmth of the patina on the markers, that's something you don't quite get with its black counterparts, and just makes it all the more special.
Yeah, there's no option with Rolex, right, to get like a vintage blue Submariner. There's not. And a lot of times people ask, I mean, they ask us all the time, is this watch too close to that watch? Is this too close to a sub? I already have a sub, or I already have a couple subs. Instantly, it's not, right? I mean, it's unique, it's blue, and right there, that's enough for me that I think this is very, very different from the Rolex, even though it's in the same case and it's the same, you know, style and dive watch and everything. It's just so unique that, you know, I think it's a great choice.
Yeah, absolutely gorgeous example here. So if you like it, go on, head over to the site and pick it up and add it to your collection.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Vintage of the Week. Don't forget to tune in next time to see what watch we'll have for you then.